Hello, welcome back to Anima Corner. Today we are back into March. I don't know how we got to March, but we are here and it is the month of growth. We have Lisa Zahia with us today, as always, and we're talking about a topic that is giant because growth is never, it's so wide and vast in its all of its things. And I think it's always interesting to see like there's so many stages of growth, especially in business, and like how those stages kind of unfold and what we think should happen versus what happens.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's an interesting word to think about because growth doesn't necessarily mean good. Like tumors grow, but also plants grow, so I think it's self-defined. And I think from a business perspective, bigger isn't always better. Um, so to me, growth is for a company is growing in a way that feels healthy. And then also, how do you grow as a person? But again, you have to self-define it first.
Yes. And I think that like at every different stage, like that definition has to be challenged. Like you really have to look at it because I think a lot of times it's just this sort of like, oh, it's going to be this like easy linear space, right? This
Mm.
space that is like super like that makes it where you're like, oh, okay, I of course am going to have these things and like that it's like, oh, it's just going to be like one step after the other and I'm just going to do all these things and like when you're actually in the business of it, you're like, this is not how it works in any way. I was talking to one of my clients this like right before this and she's like, I think I want to change and do this. And I was like, you can just know that that takes you all the way back to here. Like, that's fine. But like being realistic about like, you're going to like go back to a place from like some form of knowledge, but that space is like, it is a step back to be able to go forward. And I
Yep.
think a lot of times we get this idea of like, oh, I'm just going to put more. More is growth.
Yeah. I think the other thing I say to people is like expect a 30% contraction anytime you change. So change is not necessarily an agent for growth, although it might be in the long term. So then I think the whole thing with growth is it starts with what does that mean to me? Because the things I hear from people all the time, the first thing I hear like from people who are in my membership that are like newer is they're like, I want to hit 10,000 a month. And I'm like, why? What does that mean? And then the thing I hear from private clients all the time are like, I want to hit 1 million. I want to hit 3 million. And it's like, is that growth? Is it possible? How? Like my big question is like, how? And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, take whatever you sell and divide it by 1 million, and you have to sell those many of it. It's a sales goal. And that takes a lot of personal growth. It also takes typically team growth. So there's a lot of different kinds of growth to get what you want. So you have to get real clear about what growth means to you.
And like in it, like where's the like a million sounds nice. Nice round number. Like, you're like, oh, it's a thing, right? And it's like, okay, like how much money does that mean you're putting out for team, for product, for thing, like all of the pieces with it. Like sometimes you do that math and you're like, I am gonna personally make 30% less, right? By adding all of these pieces, right? Or does this piece of it make sense? And I think that like that's not always the conversation that's had. I think a lot of times in the like way smaller business when you're like, I just want to get to 10,000 a month, it has this feeling of like, all right, like is that even possible some of the time? Right?
Mhm.
Like, okay, I have X amount of hours to, if you're doing one-to-one clients, it's like, all right, how many hours is that doing that? Is that possible? Like in a
Right.
month? And
Yeah. Uh-huh. The the first time I hit 1 million with a business was the least amount I was making consistently. It's expensive. So like grow how?
right. And grow why? I think that a lot of times it's like, the idea of like, well, I'm going to franchise this or I'm going to, and it's like, do you really want to? Right? Like, does that type of growth like look interesting? It's like, oh, I'm interested in franchising models, and I love overseeing lots of people, and I love being able to do all of this stuff. And it's like, if you don't love that stuff, like franchising is not fun, right? Like it's not. If you're like, I love building stuff and then handing it to other people, then watching them mess it up for me, and then going in and helping them figure it out. Like, if you don't like that, like, might not be the thing to go towards. It's
Yeah, and if you want $1 million business, if you want franchises, you better be ready to grow as a person because those things are,
yeah.
yeah.
And I think they're hard in ways that people don't recognize.
You cannot take your bullshit with you if you want to do any of those things.
Agreed.
Hmm.
And we love to carry our bullshit with us.
You know, I always say, like, what's in your backpack? Like, what are you choosing to carry around with you? And oftentimes that is in the way of what you want to do and how you want to grow. Like, it's not easy to grow carrying around a bunch of stuff.
No.
Yeah.
And especially stuff that you like shoved in the bottom of the backpack you don't even want to look at.
Hmm. Yeah, and if you haven't dealt with yourself, though, you're not going to deal with other people on the scale that you have to have this kind of size of business, for sure.
So, like, where do you think the numbers come from? Right? Is it just like because they're pretty and round? Like, what is it just like the $10,000 number, the $1 million number? Is it just like the six-figure thing, the seven-figure thing? Like, is it
Yeah, I think it comes from culture. I think it comes from the internet selling us those things. I think it comes from people also aren't distinguishing between like what it means to have that money in a business versus what it means to have that money as a person. Like $10,000 a month as a person in maybe not the large cities in the United States is like a significant amount of money. Like that's not very much money to a business. So you have to stop thinking about your well, like how much money a business can have as a lot. Like, I think it's interesting because you and I work with a lot of solopreneurs that people are talking about numbers that like I'd say like 3 to 5 million is still a pretty small business.
right?
So we're not like we have to differentiate between what's a lot of money to me and what's a lot of money for a business. I also think that people just pick numbers that they hear a lot of people say. And I'm like, what does that mean to you? My favorite silly thing that people say is when they say they want to make $1 billion, and I was like, you have no sense of what that means.
No, I love looking at the like when they're like this is like it's like 1 grain of rice is this much, right? And then they like make it and they like show what a billion is and you're like that's a lot of rice, right? Like in compare like the difference between a million and a billion is like
Wild.
it's wild and it's just like, oh yeah, it's just the next
It's
like
not.
it's not.
No, no, no. I'm like, after 1 million, your next step is 5 million. It's not 1 billion. And
I
also,
mean, and
like,
so many times it's 3 million, right?
might
Like
be
if
more than
you're
half a million.
yeah, if you're a small business, right? If you are 1 to 7 employees. The jump between 1 million and 3 million is a lot of work.
It's a ton of work. I do have to say that. I do have to say that in terms of growth, I find it more challenging to get to 1 million than to get to 3 million from one
Yeah.
million. Hmm.
I
Sure. Yeah.
as I've watched other people do, I have not done it, but as I've watched other people do it, I'm like that jump seems much more doable from 1 million to 5 million than it does from like 500,000 to a million.
Yeah. I'm doing it with a client right now. She's like 1.5 million for the last couple of years and her company. And we're just implementing some scaling things and she's like, this is wild how fast it happens because you have infrastructure. Now, let's talk about growth. Something I want to say about growth from the great, like, of course, I'm going to bring up Alex Hormozy. The thing that he said that I think is so relevant is that if you are under 1 million, not enough people know who you are. And I think it's good for all of us who are like doing our little thing to hear people say that, like, that's not that big. Like, I think that's helpful in the scale and scope of things. You might choose to never do that, but still, it's like, and it just means you should spend the majority of your time getting more people to know who you are.
Yes.
Mhm.
And I think I like every time I hear Hormozy say that, or like Gary Vee or any of the others, right? It's like this idea of there's so much more out there. Like there's so much more space out there. There's so much more like ability. And it's like you're literally just like tiny, tiny tapping the surface, right? You're just like, I've put the top of my fingerprint on the pond, right? And it's like, oh, it's so interesting to see like the effect that you're having is so small. It's great in your own community of whatever, but it's like it's so tiny that you could be doing like exponentially so much more.
Yeah, so you figure how has it worked before for me to get more business, and then you go do more of it.
Yeah,
That's how you grow. Just like if I want a bigger bicep, I'm not going to be like, I feel my intuition said, duh. No, I mean, there's not that many ways to grow a bicep.
right.
Yeah, there's a couple, but they're all essentially the same thing.
You're bending your elbow. That's what you're
Yeah, like you use this to bend the elbow, which is picking up the thing in the hand. You know what I mean?
doing. Yeah,
Like that is it.
yeah.
But people like the other thing that annoys me, I feel like every time I'm on this, I'm like, this is what's wrong. Is like people, you know what's gonna make you feel better? Making the money and growing the business. So like do that instead of being like, I'm gonna spend 9 years thinking about it, talking about it. And then eventually I'm going to take some sort of action and then I'm going to complain about how it didn't work because I only took the action once. Instead of
Yes.
bending my elbow 4 times a week, 3 sets of 14.
Yes.
Yes.
And that the commitment isn't like like it doesn't have to be a whole existential crisis, right? Like the whole thing is like, all right, I'm gonna try this thing. I'm gonna give it enough time to work and see if it fucking works.
Correct.
If you have abnormally small biceps and like you're like, I'm gonna try this, you might be like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, and you're gonna be like, my biceps are okay, but like I have the best triceps in the world, I'm gonna make them look phenomenal. And that's it. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you're like, oh, I'm gonna pivot. I'm gonna work on the back of my arms because that's what you can really see in the shirt. Okay, great, amazing. Right? And it's like that is the space of it, right? Like, do I love this Like, do I want this thing bad enough to go after it? Do I want to push the limit of what I think that it can do? Yeah. Also, like, have I also not done the work to get to the point? Yeah, totally. Like, and that none of it's that serious. Like, you don't have to be like, oh, I'm the biggest asshole because of this, right? I'm not like, oh, I'll never figure this out. You'll figure it out if you want to
Yep.
figure it out.
Correct.
All right, then.
Problem solved. No.
Problem solved. We're good to go. Let's go.
Bye. No. No.
All right. In my chat GPT questions, one of the questions that I thought was interesting, can you share a pivotal moment in your career where growth felt the most challenging?
There's been a few. Uh, COVID. Um, because I
You
had a
mean
dance.
owning an in-person dance studio in the middle of COVID was hard?
Like I remember having this moment. I was sitting on the stairs because the dance studio was on the second floor and nobody's there. So I just went and sat on the stairs. And I was like, so they want me to pay the rent. There was no not paying the rent. And it was $6,000 a month. And legally, I'm not allowed to let anybody in here. I mean, and then eventually, right, all the help came out, which you need to be careful of that because you got to pay that shit back. Most of it. And I was like, what am I gonna do? And so this was really interesting because what I saw a lot of people do was like either hide, join the collective feeling of complaining about it on the internet, which people love to do. It's happening a lot right now. And they're valid feelings. I'm just like, is this the thing to do? Or I was like, I can see this as an opportunity. And I sat there and I was like, let's play around with this. And then I was also like, look at the long game. Because they, at the time they were like 2 or 3 weeks. And I was like, there's no fucking way. There's no way. And it turned into 6 months. And then they were like, you can have 4 people in the dance studio, all with masks on. And I was like, oh my God, I know it's very different than where you guys live. So anyway, I was like, I'm gonna take a gamble and completely change it, and it worked. I would say most of my moments of growth had that thing in common where I was like, I can join the collective or I can do what I think is gonna work.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, we had a very, very similar thing. Like Gabby and I we formed Las Comadres as a company. It was like all running under her business before that in January of 2020. So we signed our partnership agreement. Like we had had a very loose situation before that. Whatever, we signed the agreement and our plan was to license the model. That was our plan. We were like, we're gonna take what we created in Miami, we're gonna license it. We had a couple people that were interested in it, like in Fort
Mhm.
Lauderdale, in like North Miami and Fort Lauderdale. We had a plan. It was a solid plan. It was really pretty.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then like the pandemic happened and we were like, okay, well, we have to go online. And we were like, all right, well, we already have it running in this way. We tried a couple of things and then one of our members at the time who's like a online, what's that called? A experience expert, right? She was like, "Hey, I have a whole bunch of clients that want to move to Mighty Networks. Can we build yours for half the price?" And I was like, we were like, "Yes, please go build our Mighty Network for us."
Yeah.
And it was like we were on Mighty Networks by July. And it was like the space between like, all right, we got to figure this out. All right, what are we gonna do? But also like in the idea of like supporting community, we were like, we hosted these lunch and learns like every day on Facebook Live that were all members of our community. And we were like, hey, let's just highlight what everybody's doing and what they're giving away and what they're whatever. And it was super fun. It was so exhausting. And I had the worst case of COVID ever, but it was this really interesting space of like in the growth of it, like what's going to change and how are we going to change. I was like this is real, right? Like this is real life for at least a period of time. And like also it's going to force us to learn a bunch of stuff. I think one of the things that happens a lot for me in growth is like I'll be thinking about something for a period of time, like, okay, I want to do this, I want to do this. And then like something will show up that's like, okay, now you got to learn all of it. And it's like, then I think one of the pieces of the pandemic that felt really interesting was that there was no judgment on the learning.
Yeah.
Like, like
For
you were
sure.
like, dude, there's gonna be people showing up on Zooms that are like half dressed because they don't realize their camera's on. Like, there's gonna be like, there's all kinds of crazy shit happening. And like, it took away the filter of it. There
Mhm.
was a space of like, I don't know what's gonna happen. Like, let's see what happens. And everybody was in it together. So I feel like that was like one of those times that growth felt like so possible in the worst possible way also.
I think that we're highlighting something important is that like I always say you should sell umbrellas when it's raining. So like part of growth is considering the environment that you're in. And then, what's interesting after the pandemic is the businesses I've seen succeed pivoted again
Hmm.
and then again. And what worked, because eventually a lot of people had a lot of success as the pandemic got extended. But the people who are still expecting 2020 to strategy to work now, 5 years later, I would be thinking about pricing right now for everyone if you want to grow because the food's about to get extremely expensive in the United States.
Yeah,
But like growth is choosing to operate in the environment that I'm in instead of being sad it's not the old environment. The ease of like 2021 will never happen again.
agreed.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think that the like also where can you create the ease? Right? Like
Mhm.
where are we not looking? I think that there's always like the idea of like, all right, like I'm gonna hold on to some umbrellas so that when it starts raining, I can then bring the umbrellas out, right? The
Correct.
one of my favorite things, like New York street seller people, right? Like that this like movement of like quickness, right? That like the same guy that's selling umbrellas on the rainy day is selling hats and gloves on a different day, and he's got t-shirts during the summer, and he's got, the fans and the thing. It's like there's a season for everything. And if you're
Yeah,
paying attention, you can make it happen.
and he's also not a person who's defined himself as like the umbrella guy. And this is something I see with a lot of younger in the age of the business, like female entrepreneurs. It's not like, oh, I'm only an umbrella person and I don't like Instagram and da 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 da. Instead, he's like, I grow and support myself and my family by being a person who understands to sell how to people in the street what they need.
Yeah. One of the things I know that changed for me is I was like I started my career as a personal trainer, right? Then I moved into health coaching, then I moved into life coaching, and then I moved into business coaching. And there was a period of time between the life and the business that I was like, oh my God, or between the health and the life that I was like, I feel like every 7 minutes I'm doing something new. And I was like, ugh. And I was like, I'm just a coach. Like, like this is what I've done forever, my whole life. Like this is who I am, right? And so then I'm like, okay, if this is just who I am and this is how I behave in the world, like great. There's a like that guy's like I sell stuff on the street, right? I'm like, all right, the modality that it comes out in and that kind of stuff, like 90% of the time nobody's paying attention, right? Nobody cares. Like they don't give a shit at all. So it's like, do you have the umbrella when I need the umbrella? Fabulous.
Mhm.
Amazing. Great. Oh, look at you. You got the fan when I need the fan. Amazing. And like, are you hitting the targets that need to be hit at the time they need to be that's important to the person.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about like, oh, there's two things. One is I always say repackage your magic. Like I have a skill set, how can I serve people in this environment? So repackage it, repackage it, repackage it. The other thing I would say is like, who said it should happen fast? There's this case study of New Balance, they were like dad shoes and they brought in this new CEO and he did this very effective marketing campaign that now, like they're very popular. But that shift from like dad's cutting the grass to you see like they're very popular with like Gen Z now. It took 18 months and that's with an enormous budget. Like who said that it should be? Who said that growth and change is going to be easy?
And I think that one of the interesting thing is that New Balance leaned into the dad shoe part of it, right?
Right.
Like
It's good marketing. They
it's
understood
really good marketing, but they were like, hey, we are this, like, let's go all the way in on this and then become ironic, which then makes Gen Z into it, right? And like, if they were like, no, we're really serious athletic shoes, we're the greatest women's running shoe. Like, the women that use them as a running shoe, they don't think of themselves as running in dad shoes, but like that dad shoe thing was enough to push it over into Gen Z, right? And that the the like being able to see your own ridiculousness, I think is important to be like, okay, this is the skill set. Dads love to they're comfortable. Like dads are wearing them to cut the grass and dads don't give a shit about what they look like. All right, like how do we make that more, right? It's like going further into the part that is like the full thing.
Yep.
All right then. All right, and my other beautiful ChatGPT questions. I like this one. What's one belief about success or growth that you had to unlearn?
There's a lot. Um, I think that it's to play off of what we were just saying, that it happens fast. That it's, I think that right now it's more amplified than ever, but that like it's gonna look a certain way. That it's not messy and hard and awful. And that I get to be in control of it because we're sold stories, right? We're sold stories about many things. We're sold stories about what success looks like. what a girl like me who had an SAT score like me is supposed to achieve at a certain point in her life. We're sold what this country's supposed to be. And all of it, you're like, oh, none of that is true. Yeah, like, and that's an opportunity. I actually think the growth is realizing that and like allowing for the messy and allowing for the hard and allowing for the that you have no idea what you're doing ever. Yeah.
And you really, I mean, you really don't, and nor should you. I think that that space of like, oh, I had a very big, like, I had a very linear and also a very, like, still to this day, I'll be like, this should happen in this amount of time. I am wildly off every single time,
Hmm.
usually double. If I think it's going to take 6 months, it's going to take a year. If I think it's going to take a year, it's going to take three. Like it's like the exponential of it is like so great. And then like that it also means nothing to me, right? Like, huh, there's a lot of progress. I had no idea the 75 steps in the middle, like that I was just like yada 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 over. And so it's like, all right, like what does that really look like? And the ability to look at it and be like, okay, the growth, like I didn't know I was going to need personal growth in the business side, or I I need this, like I needed this to be, I needed to learn this entire piece that I had no idea didn't even exist. And like most of the time, it's really good if you don't know those things.
It's probably better. And like nobody knows anything, you
Nobody
know?
knows anything.
Something I use in my coaching all the time is this idea. I say, be different, do different. So doing different is the strategy, but before you ever execute the strategy, you have to change the mindset, which is being different, like choosing a different be. And you always have to, so I think that that was a big lesson for me is that there are directions on like if you really wanted to make $1 million, there are directions, you know, but if your mindset will not allow you for that, it's not going to happen. Or it's
And
going to
like,
happen in a way that feels shitty.
I was gonna say, like, there's also the like sometimes stuff happens and then you're like, oh, dude, I didn't build the infrastructure underneath it. I don't really understand how it worked, right? Like the amount of times I have clients who are like, I'm here. I don't understand how I got here. I built none of this, and I feel like at any given moment, the whole thing is gonna fall apart. And usually that's not completely true, but there's a hole somewhere and you gotta like you always have to go through the steps to get the thing there, or else it all like will fall through that eventually.
There's so many like, yeah, and there are House of Cards businesses that fall apart. And you often see like, it's interesting when the like internet marketing millionaire thing was starting. There was somebody in the city I lived in who got like famous on the internet as like a Instagram person. And he bought this big house, like he made $1 million. He like got there was a time when people would put how much money they made in those gold balloons behind them.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was like 20 years older than these people. And the whole time I was like, I had this look on my face. I was like, like, do you have the infrastructure to, here's the biggest thing to fulfill the promises. It took me the first time I hit 7 figures with a business, it took me 12 years, but we were ready. Like we were able to fulfill and it was sustainable. We did that for the last couple of years the studio was open and continued to grow. A lot of those people, some of those people got arrested, honestly. Like there are people who got there's big FC compliance issues now, like FTC compliance issues with coaches making certain promises. But a lot of them have jobs. So to me, you want to think about sustainable growth.
Yeah. And is it something that you want? Right?
Mm.
Like the other whole side of it is like because I do life and business coaching, right? A lot of times people come to me, they don't want to talk about business. They figured out they have a thing and they're trying to figure out how to get out of it. And
Mm-hmm.
like they're like, I don't necessarily want to sell the business, but I don't want to have the life that I have right now. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to do differently? Nothing. Right? You're like, well, you're gonna have to do some things differently if you don't want to be where you are. And like the idea of like it keeps building into something that you don't want
And can't control.
and can't control. And then now you feel like a lot of responsibility for the greater, well, I've built this company, I've built this thing. And listen, you can always get out. Like you can always sell, there's always an answer. But that feeling of like, I wasn't paying attention to how I wanted to grow or what I wanted to grow. I just wanted to like, I just wanted more money or I just wanted it to be bigger. I wanted to have like status of something. And it's like, I think that is like a really big piece of like the why are you doing it? Like, why you want to make $1 million? Why you want to make 3 million, 5 million, 10 million, 10,000, right? Like, does that feel like in alignment with you?
Yeah, and also you better be ready to be somebody's boss. You want to do those things. Yeah,
Do you like being someone else's boss? That is
totally.
always an interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't, and that is fine.
Right, like if you want a lifestyle business that creates a really nice lifestyle for you, I would not try to, I would be like, how much money do I need? How much profit do I have to make? And then, you can have a solid couple $100,000 business and be happy.
Yes.
Hmm.
All right. What's the best piece of business advice that you have been given?
Do more. Yeah, honestly, it is the most basic advice that change makes your business smaller. Niche hopping is a terrible idea, and you should figure out what gets you the most sales and you should do it more.
I like it.
That's
Mine
it.
is always know your numbers. I mean, like, and I was
Oh,
like the largest proponent of like I would like to not look at my numbers ever.
I mean, you've seen me and the numbers. To me, I mean, honestly, like if somebody comes to me and they don't know their numbers at all, I'm like, you have a hobby, it's not a business.
Yeah.
Because this isn't a business. Because if there's no idea of what the profit is, that is the definition of a business.
It took me so long to look at it on a regular basis, and still to this day, if I do not schedule it, it's just gone to the wind. I'm like, yeah, I don't really want to. And I know that this is about me, right? I'm like, okay, this is one of those things. So it's like it just has to be scheduled in there and on the calendar and do the things. And I have to have the people that hold me accountable to doing it because it's like it is the most non it's not it's like it's just outside of the realm of things that I like think about. Not that I
Right.
don't know. I'm like good at the numbers of like I need this many clients to do this many things and whatever, whatever. But to look at it in the profit ways of like, all right, like what does this mean? Where is this going? Like all of that, like there is some part of my brain that is just like, I don't give a fuck. And then I'm like, but that's the part that's actually really interesting. That's the part that shows you what's happening.
Yeah, the magic is in the numbers.
It always is.
I do it first thing every day.
First thing every day.
Mhm.
Okay, we're moving to Lisa level. That's what we're doing. Allie also loves the numbers. Like, yes, that's like the
It's like
first
because
thing every day.
every answer is there. I check my account. I've kept a spreadsheet for the last 15 years that is every day of that year. And I put in how much got deposited in the bank account and how much got taken out. I have an accountant. I have a bookkeeper. Um, and I get a P&L and we have we do cash accounting method, which is very similar to what I'm doing, but not exactly. But mine is so I am close to it. And then I look at projections and I look at like how we are compared to the month, the goal. It takes me maybe 6 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is if you look at it every day, it takes 6 minutes. If you look at it every week, it takes 15 to 20. If you look
Yeah.
at it every month, it takes a lot longer.
Yeah, there was a study about weight loss where they had people weigh themselves every day, and weight loss without any other action was happening faster because just like when you do a time study, you end up very efficient because you're looking at the thing. I think that I do well financially, and anytime I've had a big goal and I've written it down and I've tracked it, like I'm like, I want 20 people to come to this dance workshop. I'd write down 1 to 20, write it, write it, write it, look at it every day. I always hit the goal because you're like, you're starting to really focus on that. And that is true about money as well. So that's also part of it is I'm trying to stay that close to it.
Yeah.
Also, it is the driver. Like, if your business is a car or an airplane that is driving you towards essentially the vision statement, the ultimate thing. And, the path you choose is your mission. How do I want to do this? There's markers along the way. I've clearly thought this analogy through that are the values, but like if there's no gas, you don't go.
Yes.
Mhm. So
I
a
like
big
this
part of
analogy.
growth.
And, adding
Yeah.
that analogy with your like GPS going backwards instead of forwards is
Mhm.
that you got to put gas in the car, man.
Uh, Money is neutral. It's not a judgment. Money is completely neutral. Uh, and you need it. It is fuel.
I like the it is fuel. The neutral piece to me has always been one of those things where I'm like, it feels very neutral to me. I'm like, oh, it's just a tool. I can get it. But like the gas idea of it, like,
Hmm. And
I like
I think
this.
about it like it's also safety. Like it's fuel, just like food is fuel for our bodies, right? Like you can't be safe. You can't create what you want to create. You can't, to me, profit and impact the change you want to make in the world are directly tied to each other. So I'm very focused on money because I'm trying to make a difference.
I like this. I mean, and you don't want your car to run out of gas in the worst neighborhood you've ever been in, right? Like, like, oh, I need gas in the car. Can't go forward.
Yeah, I have a client who just found out because of the tariffs that they have things that are like en route to them from a manufacturer that's in China, and they found out in 1 minute that those goods were going to cost $100,000 more. If they didn't have $100,000, they couldn't get the goods.
Yeah.
So like, we need backups.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
that the safety of it is like that space of like, all right, I might be spending that money. Like I might have that $100,000. Okay, I think I'm going to be spending it on this, right? Like I'm sure they had that money marked for something else, right? And then they're like,
Yeah.
okay, we're going to pivot it around and it's going to be for this and we're going to be okay. But that also means we're raising the prices in these ways.
Mhm.
Also, that means it's like the ability to look at it like this stuff is already on a boat coming here.
Yeah,
Now I got to figure it out.
yeah, and clearly everybody, I'm sorry, my politics are coming through. Everybody's gonna get screwed because that money is getting passed through to the consumer. But they couldn't even pass those things through if they didn't have the $100,000. Like you need to have fuel in the tank or you're not gonna even get to where you can do that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's an interesting thought too of where stuff like that is going to go. That
Oh,
is
I know exactly where it's gonna go, and it's us.
no more of like,
Oh,
let's say they
sorry.
didn't have the $100,000 and it's
It,
on the boat.
it goes back.
It goes back, which is a
Hmm.
waste of fuel right there, right? Like, is this like
We're
that
also,
space?
yeah, it's also it's hurting people in both countries.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
Because that means that that manufacturer has to eat it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's so wasteful.
And that's a yeah.
All right. So, how do you stay patient when growth feels slow or stagnant?
I don't know if we've gotten this yet from me on these podcasts, but like I'm a little bit of a hard ass. It's how I love you. is my
Yeah.
honest answer. Like what my clients always say is like, Lisa's gonna tell us the truth.
Yes.
So get the fuck over it.
I mean, is there a good way to be able to like, I feel like there's a lot of times that you feel like stagnant or stuck, and it's like you're just like you're just waiting for the work that you've
Yeah.
done plus the work that you're doing to make it like jump up, right? It's
Mhm.
like the understanding of the ability to be like, all right, I'm gonna, like I thought this was gonna take 2 months and it's taking six
Yeah,
months, but
sure.
like that there's a movement, like when you are in that position,
So
like
I say it's faith. And so let's talk about the OG growth is a plant. So if I'm gonna grow a plant, it's very exciting at the beginning because I'm like digging on in the dirt and then I'm putting a seed down there. And then here's the part of growth that's hard. I'm staring at dirt and then putting water on it every day. And I can control when it happens. Sometimes it doesn't, right? I can maximize the process. So I have to have faith in myself and I need to not lose faith in myself. And we have to differentiate between faith in yourself and overly emotional decisions that aren't using data. So, like, I have the utmost faith in myself, and then I use data to figure out the best ways to get to what I want the fastest.
which is why you're checking the money every single day.
Yeah, and understanding like, I screwed myself and had to pay the IRS $10,000, which I didn't realize because I moved and didn't change the address. And I had the money, but then immediately there was a pivot, right? Um, but that like you have to be on top of all of that data. I had a client today say, I feel like I'm losing faith in myself. I was like, you can choose the faith in yourself, but you have to change the action. Because if you're walking into a wall, backing up 2 feet, walking into it, and then you're like, it's not working. I'm like, yeah, stupid. You're gonna keep walking into a wall. Wouldn't actually call anybody stupid, but I can turn to the right and be like, there's a door.
I can
Neat.
go around the wall.
Yeah, I can go under the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think that it's important to like listen, you can run into the wall once, maybe twice. But like if
right.
you're not looking at the data that they're slamming your face into a wall, like at what point are you gonna like it's like how often are you going to look at something and be like, all right, this thing isn't working in this direction. Do I need to turn 5 degrees and look? Like, and there's like, oh, there's a door with a doorknob on it, and I can just like open the door. Or is the door locked and I'm going to actually have to take like 30 steps the other way and I can walk around it? Like, what's the in that evaluation of like, hey, I can have total faith in myself that I am going to do this thing, and like, what's the data pointing to is two different conversations, but
Cor-
in the same moment of like,
Yeah.
all right,
So it's not get the fuck over it, although it is in some way, like it's having that energy with yourself. And then it's like, look at the money every day or whatever the parallel factor is for you.
yeah, and I think that that parallel factor is, I think it's also like knowing yourself, right? Like some people are going to be like stepping on like some people are way harder on themselves and they need to be a little nicer, right? Some people are going to be like, I don't want to look at data and they have to go look at the data. Some people are going like wherever your shortcomings are, right? Like I know that looking at data is not my favorite thing to do. If I have an appointment with myself and I have buy myself some fancy coffee, like I'll probably do it, right? Like it doesn't take much to trick me into doing the things that I need to do to get myself there, right? Whereas, you're like, okay, my favorite thing to do is ignore the problem, but like running into a wall is like starting to really hurt my face. Like then it's like, okay, like do you have the tools to step back to look? Do you have the
Right.
ability to like move into it? All right. My last question for you is when you're in the space of growth, what, like, the discomfort of it, what are the things that you use to move yourself through?
Faith, honestly, like belief in myself, the vision, the ultimate vision, and I think removal of ego and allowing the vision to be about the change I want to make. I honestly, my other answer is like having a physical fitness practice because it is the ultimate example of change coming from being uncomfortable.
I like that. For me, it's like, yes, all of that. And then it's like, I have to add in the creativity. Because for
Uh,
me, I get real stuck in like the like doing. And I'm like, okay, if I just like clear out the inbox or if I just whatever, whatever. And it's like most of the time, like I need a little more magic, man. I need a little bit more creativity. I need to like look at stuff. I need to zoom out most of the time when I'm really stuck, I need to zoom out because I'm like, my head is too far down and I'm like, let me analyze the tiny little stuff. And then I'm like, maybe just stop being such a pain in the ass.
yeah, for sure.
Most of the time, it's just stop being a pain in the ass to myself. That's usually the entire answer to all of the things.
Yeah, and like for as much as I'm a hard ass, because it is how I help people change, like, and you have to give yourself a break.
Yes,
Mind. Yeah.
be kind. Be a
Hmm.
little kinder to yourself. And I think that so much of the time, like that little bit of kindness, you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be a dick.
Yeah.
Because I'm not
Because it's
usually that way to other people, but man, to myself, not so nice.
yeah, be kind to yourself through the whole thing.
Through the whole thing.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, man. Thank you for being here. Amazing. I know you have to run, so hop off as soon as you want to. And I will go through some announcements for us. You are amazing as always. This month we've got the moon report on the 13th and the I don't know when the second one is, but there we go. And the 31st, we have our master classes this month. The first one is on price your profit. This master class is going to be really good and really like one of the reasons we wanted to have it during the month of growth is like the idea of like how much money do you need to make the goals that you set for yourself. This class on pricing is going to be really, really good. It's on the 14th. Wisdom Wednesday is mindful tech, small shifts to leverage your digital tools uh, without losing yourself. Um, this Wellness Wednesday or Wisdom Wednesday is like really about like using like tech is there to help you and like let's use it for the ways that we want to use it. We've got co-working on the 26th. We've got Broward Cafecito on the 21st and Miami Cafecito on the 28th. Um, yes, it's going to be an incredible month. If you guys have stuff that you would like to share with the community, make sure you're sharing it on Mighty Networks. If you have pieces that you're like, ugh, this is the thing I want to work on this month, we would love to support you through this. Anybody that has asked for accountability groups, we will getting those matches next week. And we thank you guys for being here. Have an incredible week, everybody.